Imagine waking up one day in prison, accused of a crime you didn't commit, with no prospect of trial, no lawyer, no family to believe in you. Now imagine that a few hours later, you're dressed in fine linen, given a ring of authority, and proclaimed the second most powerful man in a global superpower. Sounds like a movie script, doesn't it? But this is the true story of Joseph, a man who experienced the most brutal fall and the most extraordinary rise ever documented in ancient history. And the most intriguing thing isn't even the transformation itself, but the path he took to get there. Because Joseph wasn't promoted by luck, political connections, or being in the right place at the right time. He was groomed through a series of injustices so devastating they would make any of us give up. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused of rape by the mistress who tried to seduce him, forgotten in a prison for 2 years after helping someone who promised to free him. If you've ever felt like life has betrayed you, that people who should have protected you have hurt you, or that doing the right thing has only brought you trouble, this story will resonate deeply with you. Because Joseph not only survived it all, he turned each injustice into a platform for the next level. And the most powerful lesson of this entire journey is something our hurried generation desperately needs to understand. Long preparation is not wasted time. Every difficult season, every position that seems beneath your potential, every moment you wonder if God has forgotten you, all of this is shaping you for something you can't yet see. Joseph spent 13 years as a slave and prisoner before ruling Egypt. 13 years of feeling like nothing was happening, when in fact everything was being prepared. The story begins long before the imprisonment, long before Egypt, in a land called Canaan, where an old shepherd named Jacob raised his 12 sons. And if there's one thing that has complicated family relationships since the beginning of time, it's paternal favoritism. Jacob made no secret of the fact that Joseph was his favorite, the son he had with Rachel, the love of his life who died too soon. Joseph was the 11th son, born when Jacob was already old, and received special treatment that his older brothers observed with a hatred that grew daily. And Jacob, in a display of affection that would be the worst parental decision in history, had a colorful, long-sleeved tunic made for Joseph, a type of clothing not meant for work, but for authority, for those who supervise the work of others. Imagine you toiling in the hot Middle Eastern sun, tending sheep and goats, covered in dust and sweat, and your younger brother appears in formal attire, strolling through the fields as if he were some kind of inspector. Joseph's brothers hated him so much that they couldn't speak to him in peace. The Bible is quite clear on this. They wouldn't even greet the boy properly. But if the tunic was bad enough, what came next was the final straw that nearly cost Joseph his life. Because Joseph had 2 dreams, and with the typical naivete of a privileged teenager who never needed to develop emotional intelligence, he decided to share these dreams with the entire family. In the first dream, everyone was in the field binding sheaves of wheat, and Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright, while his brothers' sheaves bowed down to it. In the second dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to Joseph. You don't need to be a theologian to understand the meaning. Joseph was dreaming that the entire family, including his father and mother, would one day bow down to him. Now consider the scene. A 17-year-old boy, already hated by his brothers for being his father's favorite, arrives excitedly, telling them he dreamed they would all kneel before him. Not even Jacob, who loved Joseph, could swallow that. He rebuked his son in front of everyone, asking if Joseph really thought his father, mother, and brothers would bow down to him. The brothers became even more furious, but Jacob kept thinking about it, because deep down he knew God spoke through dreams, and perhaps there was more to it than youthful arrogance. What no one in that family could have imagined was that those dreams were prophetic, but the path to their fulfillment would be paved with betrayal, blood, and years of suffering that would transform that naive boy into a man capable of ruling empires. Joseph made the classic mistake of someone with great destiny but little maturity. He confused revelation with fulfillment, thinking that knowing the future meant he was ready for it. But destiny without preparation is just fantasy, and Jose was about to enter the most brutal school there is, one where every lesson costs tears and every promotion comes disguised as a loss. And as Jose went to sleep that night, unaware of what was to come, his brothers began to harbor something far more dangerous than envy. They began to plot how to turn that dream into a permanent nightmare. One day, Joseph's brothers were tending their flocks far from home, near Shechem, and Jacob decided to send Joseph to check on them and bring back news. It was a long journey, over 50 miles, and Joseph went alone, wearing that colorful tunic that was practically a target on his back. When his brothers saw him from afar, even before he got close, they began plotting against him. The Bible records their exact words. "Come, let's kill him and throw him into a pit and say, 'A wild animal has devoured him,' and we'll see what his dreams will become." It wasn't an empty threat or fleeting anger. It was a premeditated murder plot fueled by years of pent-up resentment. Imagine the scene. Joseph walking innocently through the desert, perhaps rehearsing how to greet his brothers, while they were looking in his direction, discussing the best way to kill him. Reuben, the eldest brother, had a flash of conscience and tried to save Joseph by suggesting they simply throw him into an empty cistern in the desert, secretly planning to return later and free him. The others agreed, probably because throwing him into a cistern and letting him die of thirst seemed even crueler than a quick murder. When Joseph finally arrived, excited to see his brothers, they violently grabbed him, ripped that hated tunic from his body, and threw him into a dry, dark cistern in the middle of nowhere. Joseph must have screamed for explanations, begging for mercy, reminding them that they were brothers, that their father would suffer, but they simply sat down to eat, as if nothing had happened. Imagine the terror of being at the bottom of a dark hole, hearing the voices of your own brothers talking peacefully while you wait there to die. But then something changed. A caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by, coming from Gilead and heading for Egypt, carrying spices, balm, and myrrh. And Judah, one of the brothers, had an idea he considered more practical. What advantage do we have in killing our brother and hiding the blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. That way we won't lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother, our flesh. Note the twisted logic. Let's not kill him because we are brothers. Let's just sell him into slavery so we never see him again. They pulled Joseph out of the cistern, negotiated with the merchants, and sold his own brother for 20 pieces of silver, the average price of a young slave at that time. Joseph was led away in chains, likely weeping, looking back as his brothers grew smaller and smaller on the horizon, unable to understand how people from his own family could do such a thing. And most painfully, he must have been thinking about those dreams, wondering if he had imagined it all, if God had truly spoken, or if it was just his own arrogance. But the cruelty wasn't over. The brothers took Joseph's colorful tunic, killed a goat, and dipped the garment in the animal's blood. They took it to Jacob and said, "We found this. Do you recognize it as your son's tunic or not?" They didn't even have the courage to lie directly. They simply presented the evidence and let their father draw the obvious conclusion. Jacob recognized the tunic immediately and cried, "It's my son's tunic! A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and wept for days. All his sons and daughters came to try to console him, but he refused any consolation, saying he would go down to the grave weeping for his son. Imagine the cynicism of the brothers, pretending to comfort their father for the grief they themselves had caused, living with that lie every day, watching the old man suffer knowing that Joseph was alive somewhere, being sold as a commodity. Meanwhile, Joseph was crossing the desert toward Egypt, a journey of nearly 200 miles in inhumane conditions, chained to other slaves without decent food, without enough water, transformed from a favorite son into commercial property in a matter of hours. And with every step of that brutal journey, Joseph had to decide what to do with this injustice. Would he let it destroy him from within, or would he find some greater purpose in this absurd suffering? When Joseph arrived in Egypt, he was sold in the slave market to a man named Potiphar, who was captain of Pharaoh's guard, essentially the king of Egypt's chief of security. Imagine the humiliation. Joseph had grown up as the son of a wealthy man, accustomed to being served, and now he was being evaluated like cattle, having his teeth checked, muscles felt, being priced and negotiated. But here begins to emerge something extraordinary in Joseph's character that will be repeated throughout his story. He decided to excel even in the worst situation. The Bible says that the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and that his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that everything he did, the Lord prospered in his hand. Joseph didn't slack off, complain about injustice, play the victim, or perform poorly because he was angry with what his brothers did. He simply decided that if he was going to be a slave, he was going to be the best slave that house ever had. He cleaned better, organized better, managed better, did everything with such excellence that Potiphar began to notice. And herein lies one of the most counterintuitive lessons in Joseph's story. His faithfulness was not in the position he thought he deserved, but in the position life placed him. He didn't know he was being prepared to rule an empire. He thought he would be a slave for the rest of his life, but he chose excellence anyway. Potiphar was so impressed that he promoted Joseph to steward of the house, placing everything he owned under Joseph's authority. The Bible says that, from that time on, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph, and the Lord's blessing was on all that he had, both in the house and in the field. Potiphar reached the point where he didn't worry about anything except the food he ate. Everything was taken care of by Joseph. He reflects on the transformation. In just a few years, Joseph went from being a new slave in the market to general manager of the entire estate of one of the most powerful men in Egypt. He had access to everything, controlled finances, supervised other servants, and was treated with respect in the house. And here Joseph could have relaxed, could have thought, I survived, now I have to keep this here until I die of old age. But Joseph's destiny was not to be Potiphar's steward, and the next test would be far more dangerous than brotherly envy, because this time it involved desire, power, and a woman's word against a slave's. Jose was about to learn that doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from consequences. Sometimes it throws you right into them, and that integrity comes at a price few are willing to pay when comfort is at stake. The Bible describes Joseph as beautiful in appearance and countenance, essentially saying he was very handsome, and this caught the attention of the wrong person, Potiphar's wife. She began trying to seduce Joseph, and it wasn't a subtle or one-time thing. It was constant and blatant harassment. She literally said, "Lie with me," bluntly, without beating around the bush, a direct order. And Joseph refused. But not only refused, he explained why in a way that shows the depth of his character. Look, my master doesn't care about anything in this house because of me. He has entrusted everything he has into my hands. He is not greater than I in this house. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do this great evil and sin against God? Note that Joseph didn't use a weak excuse like, I don't feel like it, or I don't want to risk my job. He was direct. It would be treason against Potiphar, who trusted him, and it would be a sin against God. He understood that character isn't what you do when you might get caught, but what you do when no one will know. And this woman had absolute power over him. She could make up anything and he would be killed. But Joseph chose integrity even knowing the risk. But the temptation didn't stop there. The Bible says she spoke to Joseph day after day, daily, persistent harassment, likely using promises and subtle threats, all to convince Joseph to give in. One day, when all the other servants were out and only Joseph was in the house tending to the chores, she saw the perfect opportunity. She grabbed Joseph by his clothes and said again, "Lie with me." But this time she was more aggressive, holding on tightly. And Joseph did the only thing that would preserve both his integrity and his safety at that moment. He fled, but in his haste, he left his cloak in her hands and ran out of the house. Imagine the scene. Joseph, running naked, preferring the momentary embarrassment of being seen that way to compromising his values. But that cloak in her hand became the perfect evidence for a devastating lie. The woman, furious at being rejected, shouted to the servants that Joseph had tried to abuse her and fled when she screamed, and that the proof was the clothes he left behind. When Potiphar arrived home, she told the same story. That Hebrew slave you brought here came to me to insult me, but when I screamed, he left his clothes and ran away. And here Joseph experienced one of the cruelest injustices, being punished precisely for doing the right thing. He maintained his integrity, fled temptation, and was accused of rape. Had he given in, he likely would have remained comfortable as a steward, but because he refused, he ended up in prison. Potiphar was furious. We don't know if he fully believed his wife or had doubts, but the word of a slave against that of an elite Egyptian woman was worthless. Joseph was thrown into Pharaoh's prison, a place reserved for the king's prisoners, and everything he had built through years of hard labor crumbled in minutes. He had been his father's favorite son, sold into slavery, become a trusted steward, and was falsely accused and imprisoned. If there was anything that could make Joseph question whether God existed or cared, it was precisely this: being punished for obedience. How many times have you done the right thing and only suffered? How many times has your integrity cost you an opportunity, a job, a relationship? Joseph was experiencing this at its most brutal level, and now he was in prison without formal charges, without a trial, with no prospect of release. But here is the pattern that repeats itself in Joseph's life in an almost supernatural way. The Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him, giving him favor in the eyes of the jailer. Even in prison, even after everything, Joseph did not give in to bitterness. He did not sit in a corner brooding over injustice, plotting revenge, or becoming cynical and angry. He began serving there with the same excellence he had served in Potiphar's house, and the jailer noticed. Joseph was placed in charge of all the prisoners and everything that happened in the prison, to the point where the jailer didn't worry about anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with him and made everything he did prosper. Joseph was learning something few learn. Purpose doesn't depend on position, character isn't circumstantial, and preparation happens precisely in the places where nothing seems to be happening. Sometime later, 2 of Pharaoh's officials were arrested and placed under Joseph's care, the king's chief cupbearer and chief baker. One night they both had disturbing dreams, and when Joseph went to see them the next morning, he noticed they were distressed. He asked what was wrong, and they explained that they had had dreams but had no one to interpret them. And Joseph said something profound. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Note that even after all this, Joseph still believed God spoke through dreams, even though his own dreams seemed to have been lies. The cupbearer told his dream. He saw a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes, and he pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in his hand. Joseph interpreted. In 3 days, Pharaoh would restore the cupbearer to his position, and he would return to serving wine to the king as before. Then Joseph made a request. "When all is well with you, remember me and speak well of me to Pharaoh, and release me from this prison. For I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and have done nothing here to deserve to be thrown into this dungeon." It was a desperate but fair request, and the cupbearer listened attentively. The baker, seeing that the interpretation was favorable, also shared his dream. He had 3 baskets of white bread on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph had to deliver the difficult news. In 3 days, Pharaoh would have the baker hanged, and the birds would eat his flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, everything happened exactly as Joseph predicted. The cupbearer was restored to his position, the baker was executed, and Joseph waited in prison for the cupbearer to fulfill his promise to speak about him to the king. But the Bible records a devastating sentence. The cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph had given the man hope, had used a gift from God to help him, and in return, he was completely forgotten. It wasn't a week, it wasn't a month, it was 2 full years of Joseph waking up every day thinking, could it be today? And nothing happening. 2 additional years in an unjust imprisonment. 2 years watching the guilty go free while he, the innocent, remained imprisoned. 2 years to ask a question that haunts everyone. Who goes through long seasons of waiting? Has God forgotten me too? And herein lies one of the most difficult tensions in Joseph's story, and in our own lives. God's timing rarely makes sense for our timetable. Joseph was 17 when he was sold. Now he was 30. He had spent 13 years in slavery and imprisonment, and it seemed that nothing God had promised in those dreams would come true. But while Joseph waited forgotten in an Egyptian prison, events were being orchestrated in the Ikao, royal palace that would change not only his destiny, but the destiny of entire nations, and would prove that all those years were not wasted, but preparation for a responsibility that would require precisely the wisdom that only unjust suffering can produce. In the 2nd year after the cupbearer was freed and forgot Joseph, Pharaoh had 2 dreams in one night that deeply disturbed him. In the first dream, he was standing on the banks of the Nile River when 7 beautiful fat cows came up from the river and began to graze among the reeds. After them, 7 ugly, emaciated cows came up from the river and stood beside the fat cows on the bank. And then the thin cows devoured the fat cows, but remained as thin as before. Pharaoh woke with a start, fell asleep again, and had a second dream. 7 full, good ears of wheat grew on a single stalk. After them sprouted 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, and the thin ears swallowed the good ears. Pharaoh woke in the morning with a troubled mind. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them. Consider the irony. Egypt had the finest dream interpreters in the ancient world, men trained in mysteries and symbolism, and none of them could decipher those dreams. It was as if God had sealed their understanding specifically to create the opportunity Joseph needed. It was at this moment, with the king frustrated and the wise men failing, that the cupbearer finally remembered. He approached Pharaoh and said, "Today I remember my failures," and told him about the young Hebrew in prison, who interpreted his and the baker's dreams with perfect accuracy. Pharaoh sent for Joseph immediately, and here begins one of the most cinematic twists in real history. Joseph was rushed from the dungeon, made to shave, because Egyptians shaved and Hebrews grew beards, changed out of his prison clothes and taken to the palace. Imagine the shock. Joseph had woken up that morning as usual, another day in prison, unaware that before sunset he would be standing before the most powerful man in the world. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I've heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And Joseph's response shows he hadn't changed, even after everything. "It's not in me." God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. He didn't try to promote himself, didn't feign power, and made it clear that any interpretation would come from God, not from him. Pharaoh recounted the two dreams, and Joseph gave the interpretation that would change everything. The two dreams were one. God was revealing to Pharaoh what he was about to do. The 7 good cows and 7 good ears of grain represented 7 years of great abundance throughout the land of Egypt. The 7 lean cows and 7 withered ears of grain represented 7 years of famine that would follow, so severe that it would make the people forget all the previous abundance. The fact that God gave the dream twice meant that the thing was established and would happen soon. But Joseph didn't stop at interpretation. He went further and provided the solution. He told Pharaoh that it was necessary to find a discerning and wise man and place him over the land of Egypt. He would appoint overseers who would collect 1/5 of the entire harvest during the 7 years of plenty, storing food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority so that this reserve would sustain the country during the 7 years of famine and prevent the land from being devastated. It was a brilliant economic plan, taxing 20% of production during the abundance period to create strategic reserves for the crisis. Joseph was essentially proposing the first documented national food security program in history, a storage and distribution system that would require impressive logistics, the construction of massive granaries, and national-scale resource management. Pharaoh was impressed, looked at the officials, and asked, "Can we find someone like this man, someone in whom the Spirit of God is?" Then Pharaoh turned to Joseph and said, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You will be over my house, and all my people will submit to your command. Only on the throne will I be greater than you." And at that moment, Pharaoh took the ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in clothes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in the 2nd royal chariot with men shouting in front, "Make way." Joseph was appointed second in command of all Egypt, governor over the entire land, with complete authority over the resources, economy, and administration of the most powerful empire of the time. Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Think about it. He was 17 when he was sold, spent 13 years as a slave and prisoner, and in a matter of hours was transformed from prisoner to viceroy. Pharaoh even gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, meaning something like God speaks and he lives, and married him to Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, integrating him fully into the Egyptian elite. Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt inspecting everything, and during the 7 years of plenty, the land produced abundantly. Joseph collected all the food from the 7 years of plenty in Egypt and stored it in the cities, placing food from the surrounding fields in each city. He stored grain like the sand of the sea, in such great quantity that he stopped measuring because it was impossible to calculate. Meanwhile, Asenath bore Joseph 2 sons. The first he named Manasseh, which means forgetfulness, because he said, "God has made me forget all my suffering and all my father's house." The second he named Ephraim, which means fruitful, because he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." The sons' names were a personal theology. Joseph was declaring that God had turned his pain into purpose, his losses into gains, and the place of his greatest affliction into the land of his greatest fruitfulness. He wasn't denying suffering, he was reframing it. Then the 7 years of plenty ended, just as Joseph predicted, and the 7 years of famine began. The famine struck all the surrounding countries, but throughout the land of Egypt, there was bread because Joseph had prepared. When the famine intensified and the people began to cry out to Pharaoh for food, he simply said, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." Joseph opened all the granaries and began selling grain to the Egyptians because the famine was severe throughout the land. But the crisis wasn't just in Egypt, it was global, and soon all nations began to come to Egypt to buy food because the famine was severe everywhere. Joseph became the most economically powerful man in the known world, controlling the only significant food supply available. And herein lies the brutal lesson our generation needs to learn. Joseph didn't prosper because he avoided the crisis. He prospered because he prepared during the plenty. While every other country was simply celebrating the years of plenty, spending, consuming, living as if it would last forever, Joseph was building granaries, organizing systems, preparing for a future no one else took seriously. He had the long-term vision that only comes when you've experienced enough loss to know that every good season ends, and the wisdom to not waste abundance, but use it to prepare for scarcity. And now, as entire nations collapsed, Joseph was not only surviving but saving lives on a massive scale, proving that long preparation is not wasted time. It's the difference between collapsing in crisis and leading through it. Famine also arrived in Canaan, the land where Jacob lived with his sons. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? I hear there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain, but Jacob wouldn't let Benjamin, Rachel's only other son and now the favorite after Joseph's supposed death, go with them, fearing that some harm would come. The brothers arrived in Egypt and were brought before Joseph because he was the governor of the land and the one who sold grain to everyone who came. They bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. 22 years after those dreams that nearly cost Joseph his life, there were his brothers literally bowing down before him, just like the sheaves of wheat in the first dream. Joseph recognized them immediately, but they didn't recognize him, because the last image they had of him was a 17-year-old boy begging at a cistern, not a man of almost 40, Egyptian in appearance, powerful, speaking through an interpreter. Joseph remembered the dreams, and here he could have revealed everything immediately, could have embraced his brothers, wept, and forgiven them immediately. But Joseph did something much wiser and much less naive than the boy he had been. He decided to test their character, to find out if 20 years had changed anything, if their repentance was genuine, or if they were still the same men capable of selling a brother and lying to their father. Joseph pretended to be a tough foreigner and spoke harshly to them through an interpreter. He asked, "Where have you come from?" They replied, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." Joseph accused them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." They were terrified and denied it. "No, my lord, your servants have only come to buy food. We are all sons of one man, we are honest. Your servants are not spies." But Joseph insisted, "No, you have come to see where the land is unprotected." And then they began to explain themselves. And this is where Joseph gets the information he was desperate to know. "Your servants, we are 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." Joseph pretended this confirmed his suspicions and said, "It's as I said, you are spies, and so you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you will not leave here unless your youngest brother comes. Send one of you to fetch your brother while the rest are kept, locked up, so we can test whether you are telling the truth or whether you are really spies." And Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. Imagine the cruel irony. Joseph had spent years in unjust imprisonment, and now he was throwing the brothers who caused this into prison, giving them just 3 days of a taste of what he had experienced for over a decade. On the 3rd day, Joseph said, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest, leave one brother locked up here while the rest go home carrying grain, but bring the youngest brother back to me, so that your words may be verified and you will not die." They agreed, and then began speaking to each other in Hebrew, not knowing that Joseph understood every word because he was using an interpreter. They said, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw his anguish when he begged us for mercy, but we did not listen. So this anguish has come upon us." And Reuben, who tried to save him, replied, "Didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you did not listen. Now we must answer for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood. and that spontaneous confession after more than 20 years showed that they carried guilt, that they had never forgotten, that their remorse was real. Joseph had to turn and go away to cry because hearing his brothers finally admit what they had done, finally acknowledging the pain they had caused, was too much to bear without breaking. He returned, composing himself, and chose Simeon from among them, who had him tied up before the eyes of the others. Then he ordered their sacks filled with grain, but secretly ordered each one's money to be put back inside the sack, along with provisions for the journey. They loaded the grain onto their donkeys and set off. But when they stopped for the night and one of them opened his sack to feed the donkey, he saw the money there in the mouth of the sack. He said to his brothers, "My money has been returned. It's here in the sack." And their hearts sank. They looked at each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" Notice they attributed it to God, not the Egyptian governor, because in their minds, God was finally paying for what they had done to Joseph, was orchestrating events to punish them. When they got home, they told their father Jacob everything. The powerful man who had treated them as spies, Simeon being imprisoned, the demand to take Benjamin, and when they emptied their sacks, each man's money was there, and both they and their father were terrified. Jacob broke down. "You have left me childless. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. All this falls on me." Reuben tried to convince him, saying, "You can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. Entrust him to me, and I will bring him back." But Jacob firmly refused. "My son will not go with you. His brother is dead, and he alone is left. If any harm happens to him on the journey, you will make my gray hairs go down to the grave in sorrow." Jacob rightly distrusted his sons, and he was not going to risk losing the only son of Rachel he thought he still had. But the famine remained severe in the land. And when they had finished eating the grain they had brought from Egypt, Jacob said, "Go back and buy us some more food." But Judah remembered, "The man solemnly warned us, 'You will not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food, but if you don't, we won't go, because the man said we won't see him without his brother." Jacob was angry. "Why did you bring this hardship on me by telling the man you had another brother?" And they explained, "The man questioned us intensely about us and our family. 'Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?' We only answered his questions, so how could we know he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Judah then made an offer. "That would change everything. Send the boy with me, and we will go at once so that we may live and not die. We, you, or our little ones. I will be surety for him. You will require him from me. If I do not bring him back and set him before you, I will bear the guilt before you forever. If we had not delayed, we could have gone back and forth twice already." Judah, who had suggested selling Joseph, was now offering himself as surety for Benjamin, showing a real transformation of character. Jacob finally relented, saying, "If it must be so, do this. Put in the sacks the best products of the land as a gift for the man, a little balm, honey, spices, myrrh, walnuts, and almonds. Take double the money, return the money that was in the sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man. May Almighty God give you mercy before the man, so that he will release Simeon and Benjamin. As for me, if I remain childless, I will remain childless." The men took their gifts, double the money, and Benjamin, and went down to Egypt and presented themselves before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal and prepare a feast, for they will eat with me at noon." The steward did as he was told and took the men to Joseph's house. But they were terrified, thinking they were being taken because of the money that had returned in the sacks, that they would be attacked, made slaves, and have their donkeys taken. They approached the steward and tried to explain themselves at the door of the house, telling him about the money they had found and saying they had brought back more money to buy more food, swearing they did not know who had put the money back. The steward calmed them. "Peace be with you, do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has put treasure in the sacks for you. I have received your pay." Then he brought Simeon out and gathered them together. The men were taken into Joseph's house, given water to wash their feet and food for their donkeys. They prepared gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon, having heard they would be eating there. When Joseph entered, they gave him their gifts and bowed down to the ground before him. He asked about their well-being and said, "How is your elderly father you spoke of? Is he still alive?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." and bowed down in homage. Joseph looked around and saw Benjamin, his brother, his mother's son, and asked, "Is this the younger brother you spoke of?" He said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph ran out, deeply moved by the sight of his brother and needing to cry. He went into his room and wept there. Then he washed his face, controlled himself, and came out, saying, "Serve the food." They served Joseph separately, his brothers separately, and the Egyptians who ate with him separately, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, as it was an abomination to the Egyptians. The brothers were seated before Joseph in order of age, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in absolute astonishment, for there was no way for the Egyptian governor to know their exact birth order. Joseph ordered portions from his table served to them, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than anyone else's. They ate and drank and rejoiced with him. But Joseph had one more test, the most crucial of all. He instructed the steward, "Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the youngest's sack, along with the grain money." The steward did exactly as Joseph ordered. Early in the morning, the men were sent away with their donkeys, but they had barely left the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you catch up with them, say, 'Why have you repaid good for evil? Is this not the cup my master uses for drinking and for divination? You have done a wicked thing.'" The steward caught up with them and spoke these words, and they protested, "Why does my master say such things? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. We even brought back the money we found in the sacks the first time, so why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If it is found with any of your servants, let him die, and the rest will become my master's slaves." They were so confident of their innocence that they made a fatal promise. The steward said, "Very well, let it be as you say, but only the one with whom the cup is found will become my slave. The rest will be acquitted." Each one quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. The steward searched, starting with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes in despair, loaded their donkeys again, and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers arrived at Joseph's house, he was still there, and they threw themselves on the ground before him. Joseph said, "What deed have you done? Don't you know that a man like me can surely divine?" And Judah replied, "What can we say to my lord? What can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God has discovered the guilt of his servants. We are slaves to my lord, both we and the one with whom the cup was found." Note that Judah didn't plead innocence about the cup. He said that God discovered their guilt because he knew there was a much greater guilt being judged there. But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man with whom the cup was found will be my slave. As for the rest of you, go back to your father in peace." And here came the moment of truth, the final test. Would they abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned Joseph? Would they go back to their father and tell another lie? Would they save themselves and leave their younger brother as a slave? Judah approached and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and do not let your wrath burn against your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh." And then Judah delivered one of the most moving and life-changing speeches recorded in ancient history. Judah began by recalling the whole story. "My master asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' We replied, 'We have an old father and a younger brother, the son of his old age. His brother is dead. He is his mother's only son left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him to me so I can see him.' We said to my master, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he does, his father will die.' But you said, 'Unless your youngest brother comes with you, you will not see my face again.' When we returned to your servant, my father, we told him everything. And when our father said, 'Go back and buy some more food,' we said, 'We cannot go down. We will only go down if our youngest brother goes with us.' Then your servant, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One went away from me, and I said, "Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If they take this one also, and harm happens to him, they will bring down my gray hairs to Sheol in misery." Judah was expressing Jacob's grief, the loss of Joseph, who was still bleeding after more than 20 years, and the terror of losing Benjamin as well. He continued, "So now, if I return to your servant my father without the boy, since his life is tied to the boy's life, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father in sorrow. Your servant has become a pledge for the boy before my father, saying, if I do not bring him back, I will bear the guilt before my father forever. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my master's slave in the boy's place, and let the boy return to his brothers. How can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? No, don't let me see the misery that would come upon my father. Joseph could no longer control himself in front of everyone present, so he shouted, get everyone out of my sight! And there was no one else with Joseph when he revealed himself to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard, and Pharaoh's household knew. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But the brothers could not answer because they were terrified before him. Joseph said, come near me. And when they came close, he said, I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. It must have been the most shocking moment of their lives, realizing that the powerful man holding their lives in his hands was the brother they had betrayed. But then Joseph said something that shows the level of spiritual maturity he had reached through all his suffering. And now, do not be distressed, nor be angry with yourselves for selling me here, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. There have been 2 years of famine in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant in the land and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God, who made me father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was not denying their responsibility, but he was seeing a greater hand behind it all, a purpose that turned their intended evil into good that God orchestrated. He continued, hurry and go up to my father and say, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You will live in the land of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, your children's children, your flocks, your herds, and everything you have. There I will provide for you, because there are still 5 years of famine coming, so that you, your household, and everything you have will not come to poverty. Joseph embraced Benjamin and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterward, his brothers were finally able to speak to him. News reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have come, and this pleased Pharaoh and his officials. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and go to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your families and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. You were ordered to do this. Take wagons from Egypt for your children and wives. Bring your father and come. Do not worry about your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had ordered, and provisions for the journey. He gave each of them new clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. For his father, he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed he said, don't quarrel on the way. They went up from Egypt and went to the land of Canaan to Jacob, and they said, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. Jacob's heart grew cold because he did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said, and when he saw the carts Joseph sent to carry him, Jacob's spirit revived. And Israel said, enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I will go see him before I die. Israel set out with all he had, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in the night visions and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he answered, here I am. God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you a great nation. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes. So Jacob set out from Beersheba with his entire family, 70 people in all, and they went to Egypt. Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to show him the way to Goshen. And when they arrived there, Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet his father. As soon as he appeared before him, Joseph embraced his father and wept on his neck for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh that my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds. They have always been livestock keepers, and they have brought their flocks, herds, and everything they own. He presented them to Pharaoh, who gave them the land of Goshen to live in, and Joseph provided food for his father, brothers, and his entire household according to the number of his dependents. Joseph supported the entire family during the years of famine, and through his wise stewardship, Egypt not only survived but prospered, acquiring land and consolidating power as other nations collapsed. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years, and as he was dying, he blessed all his sons prophetically, acknowledging Joseph's transformation and Judah's leadership, weaving together the destiny of Israel through the final words of a father who had lost everything and regained more than he imagined possible. Joseph's story doesn't simply end with a happy ending of family reconciliation. It extends to show something deeper about forgiveness, wisdom, and the nature of divine purpose working through human tragedy. After Jacob died, the brothers were terrified that Joseph had merely tolerated them for their father's sake and would now take revenge. They sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. Tell Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and the sin they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of your father's God." Joseph wept when he received the message, and the brothers came and threw themselves before him, saying, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said, "Do not be afraid. Am I in God's place? You intended evil against me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the salvation of many lives. So do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he comforted them and spoke gently to them. Joseph wasn't being naive or weak in his forgiveness. He had tested his brothers, seen genuine repentance, and observed a real change of character, especially in Judah, who offered his life for Benjamin. But most importantly, Joseph had developed a perspective that transcended personal offense. He could see that his entire life had been orchestrated for a purpose greater than his individual pain. The 13 years of suffering weren't wasted. They were training for managing a global crisis. Potiphar's house taught resource management. Prison taught patience, humility, and how to thrive without recognition. Each season of apparent defeat prepared him for a responsibility that would require precisely those skills forged in the fires of injustice. Think about it. If Joseph had been promoted from favorite son straight to viceroy of Egypt at 17, he would have been a disaster. He would have been arrogant, inexperienced, insensitive to the suffering people, lacking the wisdom needed to manage a nation in crisis. But after being a slave, he understood the least. After being a prisoner, he understood the forgotten. After being wronged, he had compassion for the oppressed. After waiting years for God's timing, he didn't panic when he had to make long-term decisions that wouldn't have immediate results. Joseph was shaped by adversity into someone capable of saving nations, and he recognized it. When he looked back, he didn't just see betrayal and injustice. He saw God's hand writing a larger story he couldn't see while it was happening. And this is perhaps the most revolutionary lesson for our generation, which wants everything fast, easy, and now, long preparation is not wasted time. It is the process by which God qualifies you for something that doesn't yet exist on your horizon. That difficult season at the job you hate may be teaching you skills you'll use for decades. That relationship that ended badly may be protecting you from something worse and preparing you for something better. That door that slammed in your face may have saved your life from a seemingly good path that would ultimately destroy you. Those years when you feel stuck while everyone else moves on may be exactly the time you need to develop the maturity your next level will require. Joseph lived 110 years in Egypt, saw the children of Ephraim to the third generation, and before he died, he said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph made the children of Israel swear, "God will surely visit you, and then you must carry my bones from here." He died at 110 years old, was embalmed, and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Even in death, Joseph maintained faith that Egypt was not the final destination, that God had greater promises for his people, and that someday, hundreds of years in the future, when Moses led the Exodus, his bones would be carried back to the promised land. Joseph transformed betrayal into destiny, prison into a palace, injustice into an instrument of salvation for millions. He proved that what men plan for evil, God can redirect for good, not by nullifying evil, but by superimposing a purpose so great that evil itself becomes part of the path to redemption. And the key to it all was not just God's supernatural favor, but Joseph's response in each season. He chose excellence as a slave when he could have chosen mediocrity. He chose integrity with Potiphar's wife when he could have chosen convenience. He chose prison service when he could have chosen bitterness. He chose to forgive his brothers when he could have chosen revenge. He chose to see a greater purpose when he could have chosen victimhood. Each choice, each season of faithfulness in the dark, was building the man who would carry the weight of ruling a superpower during the greatest crisis in ancient history to that point. So if you're in a season that doesn't make sense, if you've been betrayed by someone you loved, if you're being punished for doing the right thing, if it seems like God has forgotten you while elevating others, Joseph's story tells you something powerful. Long preparation isn't wasted time. It's exactly what you need to carry the weight of a destiny that hasn't yet arrived. Joseph wasn't promoted despite his suffering. He was promoted because of it, because it produced qualities in him that comfort never could. And perhaps you're right now in your Egyptian prison, that place where nothing seems to be happening, where you serve faithfully but no one recognizes it, where you do the right thing but only reap injustice. But what if this prison is your university? What if these years of waiting are the necessary curriculum for God's leadership school? What if the delay isn't rejection, but meticulous preparation for something so great that you would collapse if it arrived too soon? Joseph was 17 when the dreams came, 30 when they were fulfilled. 13 years of preparation for decades of impact. 13 years of feeling like the dreams were lies, when in fact each day was weaving the reality that would make the dreams possible. And here's the truth that hurts but liberates. God isn't behind in His timing. You're ahead in your desperation. You want the promotion, but God is building the character to sustain it. You want the position, but God is developing the wisdom to avoid destroying it. You want the influence, but God is forging integrity to avoid abusing it. And all of this takes time, hurts, frustrates, makes you question whether you heard correctly, whether God is really there, whether it's worth continuing to do the right thing when it seems like only failure is going on. Did Joseph question? Probably. Did he cry? Definitely. Did he want to give up? I imagine so. But he continued to choose fidelity, excellence, and trust, even when nothing around him justified those choices. And in the end, when it all came together, he could look back and say with authority, "You intended evil, but God intended good." Now think about the practical areas of your life where you can apply the principles Joseph lived. First, choose excellence in your current position, not in the position you desire. Joseph didn't wait to be a steward to work well. He worked so well as a slave that he became a steward. He didn't wait to be in the palace to demonstrate wisdom. He demonstrated so much wisdom in prison that he was taken to the palace. Preparation doesn't begin when you get where you want to be. It begins exactly where you are, even if where you are is radically inferior to what you know you were made to be. If you excel only when you have recognition, a title, and an adequate salary, you're not ready for the next level, because the next level will demand excellence when no one is looking, when it doesn't pay off, when it would be easier to relax. Joseph ran Potiphar's house as if it were his own, managed the prison as if it were its warden, interpreted Pharaoh's dream as if he were already a royal advisor. He inhabited the future with his attitude, even when circumstances screamed otherwise. So ask yourself, how are you working today? With excellence that bothers because it's disproportionate to your position? Or with mediocrity that keeps you exactly where you are because you deserve more? Jose proved that you never deserve more than you're willing to give where you are. Second application, maintain integrity even when it costs everything. Joseph chose prison over giving in to Potiphar's wife. He chose temporary injustice over a lasting commitment of character. And this is brutal for our generation, which was taught that you deserve to be happy, that no one needs to know, that everyone does it. Joseph had every excuse in the world to give in. He was far from home, no one would know. The woman had power over him. He had already suffered enough and deserved some pleasure. Resisting would ruin everything he had built. But he understood something few do. Character is non-negotiable because it's the only thing you carry from one season to the next. Position can be taken away. Wealth can vanish. Health can fail. But who you are, when no one is looking, defines everything. And Joseph knew that if he betrayed Potiphar, even if it was never discovered, he would have betrayed himself, proving that he was governed by circumstance and not conviction. So he fled, losing everything in the short term, but preserving the only asset that truly mattered: God's ability to trust him with more. Because God doesn't promote talent without character, doesn't elevate competence without integrity, doesn't entrust a kingdom to someone who hasn't proven faithful in the hidden. How many opportunities do you need to reject today that seem advantageous but would corrode your soul? How many shortcuts do you need to refuse because the long term is worth more than a quick win? Joseph shows you that integrity always costs in the short term, but always pays in the long term. Third practical lesson: use each season to develop skills that the next will require. Joseph didn't just sit in prison waiting to get out. He interpreted dreams, served people, led prisoners, learned more about human nature, patience, and managing expectations. Each environment was a classroom. In Potiphar's house, he learned elite Egyptian resource management. In prison, he learned to deal with despair, hopelessness, and people at their lowest ebb. When he arrived at the palace, he had a complete curriculum. He knew how to manage wealth and scarcity, knew how to lead in abundance and crisis, knew how to speak to the powerful and the marginalized, understood economics, politics, agriculture, logistics, and human psychology. 13 years of informal education that no university could provide. So look at your difficult season and ask, what is this teaching me? What skills am I developing? What perspectives am I gaining? What depth of character is being forged? Because if you're just surviving, complaining, and waiting for it to end, you're wasting school. But if you're observing, learning, growing, absorbing lessons, that specific environment can teach, you're being prepared. Joseph's imprisonment wasn't divine punishment. It was a heavenly postgraduate course. And his current predicament may be just that: not punishment, but empowerment; not abandonment, but intensive training; not the end of the story, but a necessary chapter before the climax. Fourth application: test people before trusting fully, but forgive when there is genuine repentance. Joseph wasn't naive in his forgiveness. He didn't immediately reveal his identity, nor did he embrace his brothers just because they showed up needing help. He tested them. He put them in situations where their character would be revealed. He created opportunities for them to abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him, to see if they had changed. And only when he saw that Judah was willing to give his life for his younger brother, only when he heard a genuine confession of guilt between them, only when he observed real transformation, did Joseph reveal himself and restore the relationship. This isn't unforgiveness, it's wisdom. Forgiveness doesn't mean automatically trusting the person who hurt you. It means releasing the person from the emotional debt, but not necessarily from the relational consequences until change is demonstrated. Joseph forgave in his heart long before revealing his identity, but only restored closeness when he saw evidence of change. How many of us skip this? We forgive and immediately return to the dynamic that caused the hurt, only to be hurt again and confused. Joseph teaches you, always forgive, trust wisely, and restore when there is genuine fruit of repentance. Don't be cynical, thinking no one changes. Judah changed radically. But also don't be naive, thinking everyone changes. Test, observe, and give time and opportunity for character to reveal itself before showing vulnerability again. Fifth, and perhaps most powerful application, reinterpret your story through the lens of a greater purpose. Joseph could have remained trapped in the victim narrative. I was betrayed, sold, falsely accused, forgotten. My life was stolen. All of this was factually true, but Joseph chose a different narrative. God sent me ahead to preserve life. He didn't deny his brother's wickedness, but he refused to make their wickedness the central point of the story. The central point was divine purpose, using even human wickedness to fulfill a redemptive plan. And this liberates in a radical way. As long as your identity is tied to the injustice suffered against you, you remain a prisoner even after you leave prison. But when you can look at the same story and see that God was weaving something greater than your pain, something so great that even the pain became a necessary part of the process, you are free. Not free from memory. Joseph remembered everything. Not free from sadness. Joseph cried several times remembering. But free from the emotional prison of living, defined by what they did to you rather than by what God is doing through you. So sit down and rewrite your story, not denying facts but changing interpretations. That betrayal taught you discernment, that saved you from worse. That failure humbled you in a way that prepared you not to squander success. That loss emptied you, creating space for something better. That delay developed patience that those in a hurry never have. You are not late. You are being prepared. You have not been forgotten. You are being forged. You are not wasting time. You are gaining wisdom that has a price. And now we come to the most uncomfortable and most necessary point. Perhaps you are in the season of waiting precisely because God knows you are not yet ready for what you asked for. Joseph, at 17, was not ready to rule Egypt. Simple as that. He was immature, insensitive, arrogant, naive. The dreams were real. The destiny was true. But the boy did not live up to the greatness of the calling. He needed to be broken, humbled, refined, matured. He needed to learn that leadership is not about being served, but about serving. That authority without character is tyranny. That position without compassion is oppression. That power without wisdom is destruction. So God placed you in a process that would hurt, endure, and transform. And maybe, just maybe, you are exactly there. You prayed for influence, but God is working integrity. You asked for a platform, but God is building depth. You want a microphone, but God is developing a message. And until your inner self matches the outer self you desire, God in mercy will withhold the promotion because promoting you too soon would be destroying you. Have you ever seen people who achieve too much too quickly? Marriage before emotional maturity turns into bitter divorce. Money before character turns into corruption and addiction. Fame before a solid identity turns into mental breakdown. God loves you too much to give you what you want when you want it, if it will kill you. So he holds back, delays, thwarts your hasty plans, and you think it's because he doesn't love you, when in fact it's precisely because he loves you that he doesn't give you poison wrapped in gift paper. Joseph needed 13 years. Maybe you need 5, or 10, or 2. I don't know. But I do know that if you're in a long season of preparation, of closed doors, of apparent divine silence, of doing everything right and nothing changing, you may be exactly where Joseph was between 17 and 30, in the school of kingdom government, learning lessons that no book teaches and no shortcut offers. And the question isn't, when will this end? The right question is, what am I becoming through this? Because when it ends, and it will end, you'll need to be someone different from who you were when you started. The Joseph who entered prison wasn't capable of leaving for the palace, but the Joseph who left prison had been so transformed by the process that he wasn't just capable of entering the palace, he was capable of administering it with wisdom that impressed even Pharaoh. The season changed him from a spoiled boy to a mature man, from a naive dreamer to a wise leader, from someone with potential to someone with the character to realize that potential without self-destructing in the process. And that doesn't happen quickly. True growth is slow, painful, and frustrating, but it's the only real and lasting way. There's a final layer to Joseph's story that most people miss, but which is absolutely crucial. Joseph saved not only his family, but entire nations. His preparation wasn't just for his own benefit, it was for the preservation of multitudes. God doesn't prepare you just to prosper. He prepares you to be a channel of provision for others. Joseph managed the crisis so that millions didn't starve. Nations came to buy from him. His family was sustained. The people of Israel were preserved in Egypt until they were numerous enough to return to the promised land generations later. It all began with a boy thrown into a cistern by his brothers. But God took that injustice and turned it into the turning point that would save the known world of the time. So when you're in your difficult season and ask yourself, why me? Consider, maybe it's not just about you. Maybe God is preparing you to be an answer to prayer for people you don't even know yet. Maybe the wisdom you're gaining in pain will comfort hundreds who will go through similar pain. Maybe the provision God is promising you is so you can provide for others. Perhaps your story of overcoming will inspire someone on the brink of suicide to try one more day. Perhaps your testimony of faithfulness in the darkness will spark hope in someone who's giving up on God. Joseph wasn't just prepared to be rich and powerful, he was prepared to be a savior. And you too can be prepared not only to prosper, but to be an instrument of life-saving light in the darkness of others. Hope when all around there is only despair. Joseph's story shatters 3 deadly lies our culture peddles. The first is that long preparation is wasted time. It's not. It's exactly what you need. The second is that you need shortcuts, connections, and luck to get where you need to be. You don't. You need character, faithfulness, and God's timing. The third is that if something bad happened, God abandoned you. He didn't. He may be using what seems like destruction to build something greater that you don't yet see. Joseph proves. these three truths irrefutably. He had the longest and most painful preparation imaginable. He took no shortcuts. He went through every possible experience. And yet, or rather, precisely because of it, he arrived where God always planned him to. Not despite the suffering, but through it. Not by avoiding the pain, but by being refined by it. Not by taking shortcuts, but by walking the long path that builds a foundation that can bear the weight of destiny. So here's the final challenge. What if you stopped fighting the season you're in and started cooperating with what God is doing within it? What if, instead of just asking to be released from prison, you asked what you should learn while you're there? What if, instead of being embittered by the betrayal, you sought the greater purpose that might be woven through it? What if, instead of complaining about the delay, you used the time to become worthy of the destiny you're complaining hasn't arrived? Joseph transformed a cistern into a throne room by not denying the cistern, but choosing excellence in it until the throne was inevitable. He transformed a prison into a palace by not passively waiting, but actively serving until his character could no longer be ignored. He transformed the betrayal of brothers into the salvation of nations by not taking revenge, but by forgiving and seeing God's hand in what human hands have done wrong. And you can do the same. Your current cistern, your place of rejection, your season of invisibility. All of these can be the very womb where your destiny is being gestated. Uncomfortable, cramped, dark, but necessary. And when the time comes, and it will, you won't leave the same way you entered. You'll leave transformed, prepared, qualified, mature, ready not only to receive what God promised, but to manage without wasting, lead without oppressing, prosper without corrupting, influence without manipulating. Joseph went from a bankrupt slave to the second in command of Egypt, because each season, each injustice, each delay added another layer of wisdom, another dimension of character, another lesson in leadership he would need when he ruled an empire. And when he finally got there, he didn't arrive green, immature, or unprepared. He arrived ready. He arrived tested. He arrived approved at every level life could test. And he ruled with an excellence that made even the pagan Pharaoh recognize that God's spirit was within him. This is what long preparation produces. Not just position, but competence to honor that position. Not just anointing, but character to carry that anointing. Not just destiny, but maturity to fulfill destiny without destroying yourself in the process. So if you're in your season of long preparation, take a deep breath and understand. You're not behind, you're not forgotten, you're not wasting time. You're exactly where you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, becoming exactly who you need to become, to do exactly what God always intended you to do. And when your time comes, and it will, you will look back and say, as Joseph did, they intended evil, but God intended good, to accomplish what is now happening, the preservation of many people. Your story of pain will become a testament to purpose. Your season of darkness will become a platform of light. Your time of forgetfulness will become a moment of revelation. And everything, absolutely everything, will make sense in a way you never could while in the midst of pain. Trust the process, stay faithful, choose excellence, preserve integrity, and wait, because long preparation is not wasted time. It's exactly what transforms you from someone with big dreams into someone capable of achieving them without losing your way. Joseph proved it, and you will prove it too, because the same hand that held Joseph in the cistern, in Potiphar's house, in prison, and in the palace, is holding you right now, right where you are, preparing you for something greater than your current mind can conceive. Trust in this, rest in this, live it. Because Joseph's story didn't end with him. It continues in everyone who chooses faithfulness when it would be easier to give up, who maintains character when no one is looking, who sees purpose where others only see tragedy. This should be your story too. You just need to remain faithful in the shadows, while God prepares your audience. Continue serving with excellence where no one applauds while God prepares your stage. Continue trusting in the invisible while God works in the impossible. And when you least expect it, just like Joseph, you will emerge from the shadows into the light, from the margins to the center, from the prison to the palace, and everything, absolutely everything that seemed wasted will be revealed as essential preparation for the destiny that has always been yours. And if today your soul cries out, asking how much longer, if your heart is tired of waiting, of trusting, of believing that something will change, I remind you, Joseph waited 13 years. 13 years between the dream and its fulfillment. 13 years feeling like God lied. 13 years of doing everything right and nothing improving. But on the 30th day, when Pharaoh had those dreams, when the cupbearer finally remembered, when Joseph was taken from prison and placed before the king, in a matter of hours, the entire narrative changed. Decades of preparation converged in a single day of promotion. Years of faithfulness in the hidden world were rewarded with authority in the public. Seasons of anonymous pain transformed into a platform of visible purpose. And it all made sense, not because the pain stopped hurting retroactively, but because the purpose became so clear, so great, so necessary, that the pain gained meaning that redeemed it. So hold on tight. Your day is coming. Your hour is being prepared. Your palace is being built while you serve faithfully in prison. And when it arrives, and it will, you will do what Joseph did. You will cry, remembering the journey. You will forgive those who hurt you because you will understand that God used even evil to position you for good. And you will look forward not with bitterness about the past, but with wisdom that only a difficult past could produce. Then you will be dangerous. Then you will be unstoppable. Then you will be exactly what God always saw when He looked at you. Not just someone with potential, but someone with proven character, tested fidelity, wisdom acquired through suffering, ready not only to receive blessings, but to be blessings, not only to have much, but to do much, not only to reach the top, but to take others with you. This is Joseph's story, and for God's sake, make it your story too, because the world is starving, literally and metaphorically, and it needs people who were prepared in scarcity to manage in abundance, who were refined in injustice to lead with justice, who were broken by pain to have compassion for the broken. The world needs more Josephs, and maybe, just maybe, you're one of them. Now stop complaining about the season and start extracting from it everything God has placed there to prepare you, because long preparation is not a waste of time. It's the difference between having a destiny and being ready for it. And Joseph proved that it's worth every tear, every year, every injustice, when you finally arrive where you always belonged, not as you arrived before, but as you were transformed along the way.